The views expressed and opinions given by the individual hosts and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Z-Talk Radio, its affiliates, or sponsors.
The invaders. Alien beings from a dying planet. Their destination, the Earth. Their purpose, to make it their world. David Vincent has seen them. For him, it began one lost night on a lonely country road looking for a shortcut that he never found. It began with a closed, deserted diner and a man too long without sleep to continue his journey. It began with the landing of a craft from another galaxy. Now, David Vincent knows that the invaders are here, that they have taken human form. Somehow he must convince a disbelieving world that the nightmare has already begun.
Join us now as we get lost in space.
You are now lost in space with me, your host, Al Warren. Tonight we have author Byron Lacy. Now, Byron Lacy was first visited by aliens when he was 5 years old. That forever changed his life. Lacy, who holds a degree in English and art, he has now written a book called Chosen, Chronicles of an Alien Abductee. We're going to talk to him about all of his experiences and writing the book right after these words.
Introducing the Starbucks Flat White. Crafted with 2 ristretto shots for bolder, caramelly espresso. Whole milk, steamed to a sweet, velvety microfoam. Delicately poured, so the espresso rises to the top. The perfect union of bold and sweet. Simplicity is its own artistry.
Hey, Dr. Phil here. You know, I help people solve difficult problems every day, but one problem has me stumped: childhood hunger. Nearly 16 million children in America struggle with it. Luckily, the Feeding America network of local food banks collects surplus food, giving hope to hungry children and their families. But they need your help. Join me in supporting Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
You can listen to us anytime, anywhere now. Download our free app now for the iPhone and iPad. Look for the Warren Exchange or House of Mystery app at the Apple App Store today. Danger!
We are back, and joining us now is someone that's been very interesting. I've heard him on other shows. He's written a book called Chosen. It's the Chronicles of an Alien Abductee. His name's Byron Lacy. Thank you for taking time to talk with us today.
Thank you, Alan. I'm glad to.
So it's quite a book and quite the story. So now, when did so for listeners, let's talk a little bit about you, like where you were growing up and kind of when you had your first experience.
Okay. Well, I was born in Burnett, Texas, and we lived in 8 different cities before I turned 6 years old. And my first experience was at the age of 5, and I believe we were in Anthony, Texas, which is near El Paso. Would you like me to tell you what happened?
Well, yeah, sure. We'll get. I was going to say. So now you are 5 years old, and was there a reason why you were moving to a lot of cities? Was it kind of like, were you part of a military family or something, or?
No. The main excuse I heard from my parents is my dad was looking for the right job. When I was 2.5, we lived in Austin, and before that we lived in Marble Falls. When I was born, we lived in Marble Falls, and Dad was trying to be a cattleman, which he had done growing up, but everything changed after World War II, and there was just actually not very much of a way for a single person, one person, to run a cattle ranch. And so he started getting different jobs, and at 2.5, I ended up, well, actually it started when I was 1, but when I was 2.5, I discovered I had cancer. He had to have a good paying job to pay for that, and we moved to Austin, where he worked as a policeman. Then we moved to Anthony, where he worked with the federal prison, and he then transferred to Seagoville in 1956, where we would only be about 3 or 4 hours from his family in Marble Falls.
Wow. And so you had cancer at a young age.
Yes. In fact, I'm not even supposed to be alive, according to the doctors. I had a sarcoma. And at 1, my parents told me that my development just stopped. I couldn't sit up. I didn't have any interest in food. They took me to this doctor in Marble Falls for almost 1.5 years, and he just said, I don't know what's wrong, but I had stopped being able to urinate unless I was laying on my side. So they sent me to a urologist in Austin, and we got an appointment really quickly. Dad said that when the doctor came downstairs in the elevator, we were in a big hospital, he came downstairs holding me and stepped out of the elevator, that he was as white as his doctor's coat. And he told my parents I had cancer, I had a sarcoma, and he told them that most likely I would not live. And his suggestion to them was to start working on a new baby immediately so that it would lessen the blow when I died. And they operated on me within a week. They got me in there really fast and did the operation. Of course, the only thing they did was operate. We didn't have chemotherapy, we didn't have radiation, none of that. And I've looked at a desk reference, and it says with a sarcoma that with chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery, they can prolong the patient's life, but that he will eventually die, not of old age. So it was really lucky. My cancer grew in a straight line outward instead of inside my body, but outward into my bladder instead of into my body, which was unusual. And they still had to go to the doctor till I was 13 for checkups, but finally they let me go.
Wow, that's quite a start. And then at 5, you had your first experience. So what was that experience?
Well, it happened over 3 days. Mom took me to bed, put me in bed, and tucked the blankets on me, which I would sort of kick off after she left the room because I didn't like to be hot. But this night, she came in, put me to bed, tucked me in, walked out, and turned out the light. And I could still see in the room because of the light coming in from the window and from the hallway. And there were 3 little men that just appeared out of nowhere at the end of my bed. It's my left side, down at the foot of the bed, but they were at the side, not at the footboard. And I was just shocked. They weren't scary or anything, but little men weren't supposed to appear in my room. So I called Mom, and she came in there, and they weren't there. They disappeared before she entered the room, before she turned on the light. So she looked around and said everything was okay, and she left. Next night, the exact same thing happened. And the next night, the same thing happened, except I called her into my room, and she came in. She looked around briefly, and she sat down, put her hand on top of my head, and she said, "Son, you're just going to have to deal with them alone, because every time I come in here, they're gone, and they're not ever going to be here when I come in here." So then she tucked me in and left. Only this time, after she turned out the light and left the room, they were back. They were standing at the foot of my bed on the side, 3 of them, and there was a tall, he looked like a pirate. He looked like he was about 7 foot tall, and he looked like Captain Hook out of Peter Pan by Walt Disney, a movie they made in 1953, and I believe there was also some books done from the movie with the same pictures. And I really did like Peter Pan at that time, and I liked pirates. Well, he danced around the room, and I could not see his face, but it did look like he had an eye patch on. And at that time, I came to the conclusion that the little guys were pirates as well, except somehow they had 2 eye patches instead of 1. He was dancing around the room, and he danced in a real jerky fashion. He had a really big pirate's hat on and a vest that flared out. And it was as if my bed, well, first, the room just seemed to be bigger, magically. It was just bigger, and my bed that I was still on began to rotate in the middle of the room, slowly, while he's dancing around the room. Then all of a sudden I felt like I was tied up, and I looked down at my wrists, and there were no, I wasn't bound, there were nothing tying me up, but I couldn't really move, and I couldn't look at the rest of my body. And I was getting distraught about this when suddenly I was free, and they were gone. The room was the real size, and everything was over with. So I just pulled the blankets over my head and went to sleep. From then on, I figured if these people were going to come back, or whatever they were, I wasn't going to get any help from my mother. So after she'd leave, I just pulled the covers over my head every night. So if they came back, I didn't know.
So what do you think that, at that age, what were you thinking that it was? Like, were you thinking this is aliens or people from another world? Or did you have any idea?
I had never heard of aliens. I had never even heard of Earth people aliens. I had never heard of any of that. It was really confusing. And one of the figures, the middle one, his features on his face would change. And sometimes he looked like a rag doll, and like all of his features were stitched onto his face, but then he would change back and be like the others. So I didn't know what they were. Since then, I, of course, figured it out.
Yeah, and were you feeling like they were there to hurt you? Were you scared? Were you, what were your feelings at that time?
I was never afraid. I know I was never afraid. The feelings I got from them weren't that they were good or bad. Now, the dancing pirate, he seemed sort of funny in a way, but it was also confusing that I couldn't really be entertained by it, especially when I was suddenly tied up or paralyzed, whatever that would be probably what it was. But I was just confused, and because I was not able to talk about it with anyone, it sort of became like my own personal myth. I couldn't tie it to anything. I couldn't fit it into my life story. And many, many things strange have happened to me between then and now. And until 2009, I told people about them, and we thought they were guardian angels doing things, or spirit guides. But at that time, I just had no idea.
And so then after that experience, what was the next time something like this happened?
Well, the next time I actually saw the aliens was in 2009, but a lot of different things happened that were strange, like I had my life saved 8 different times. Besides the cancer, which they may have been involved in holding it in check until it was discovered.
So now you think that they were responsible for saving your lives several times?
Yes.
So how do you think they did that? So you must think that they've been, I guess, kind of keeping an eye on you or surveying you in order to know that you've had where they had to save your life.
Since 2009 and different things that have happened, I have figured out that they hear me, and I think they see through my eyes 24/7, because they've actually done some things for me that I requested. But the life-saving things, I mean, like, let me just tell you one of them. There's no way they could have known something was going to happen until the last minute, it seems to me, unless they can see our future. And I have heard that's true. But at any rate, I was in junior college, and I was 21 years old, and we were at a pep rally. I was in the band. We were at a pep rally for homecoming. We got through with the pep rally, and we had this cannon that we always discharged, or the cannon team discharged, right at the end of the pep rally. Well, we had broken into small cliques and little groups, and I was talking to this person I didn't know very well, but he'd started talking to me, when suddenly someone tapped me on my left shoulder. I turned to my left where I was facing him, and I'd never seen him before. Henderson County Junior College was not a big campus, and even if you didn't have somebody in class, you usually, after about a few months, you had seen everybody that was going to school there. I had never seen this person before, and I'm thinking, oh, what the heck does he want? And I'm getting ready to tell him that I'm already talking to someone. I apologize, but I'm going to go back to my conversation. When the cannon blew up, and a rush of air went across the small of my back, and I saw out of my right eye, I saw the guy I'd been talking to crumble to the ground, and all these people suddenly were just rushing around him. And I walked over sort of close, and I could see some blood on him and tell he was wounded. I turned back around to say something to the guy that had saved me from this, because I was standing in front of him, and the guy was gone. Now, what had happened was, because it was homecoming, the cannon crew had put a double load of powder and a double wadding. If they hadn't have put a double wadding, this probably wouldn't have happened. But the back end of the cannon blew up, and it put shrapnel into 3 buildings and knocked bricks out of them. And it put one piece of shrapnel about the size of a hardball into the pelvis of the guy I'd been talking to. He was in the hospital for 7 or 8 months, getting well. It would have probably hit me right in the small of the back at the base of my spine, and I would have either been killed or paralyzed, except for this stranger that saved my life.
Wow. And so at that time when things were happening and you kept having your life saved, did you ever tie it to the visits you had?
No, I really wasn't thinking about those. Now, I also saw a spaceship in 1961 with a whole group, but I just never put all these things together. I liked science fiction, but I never watched things about aliens. I don't know if they were any at that time. They were more like horror films, but of course no blood in the 50s. Anyway, I never did tie it together, and I'd tell people about it, and they go, "Oh wow, God must really like you, or your guardian angels are watching after you." So that was what I just accepted, even though I couldn't figure out why. That was what I accepted as the cause at that time.
And so when was the next time that you had a visit or something that brought you back to this?
Do you mean when I discovered, or just another experience?
Well, no, not so much another. Yeah, your next experience with the aliens.
Okay, well, my next experience with the aliens happened in 2009. Now there were a lot of things that happened that they were doing, but I didn't know it. But in 2009, I was going home from dinner, and I'd stopped at the stoplight on the busiest street in Nacogdoches where I live, and it's right in front of Walmart. And up at the end of the stoplight, suddenly there was a disc the size of a dinner plate, only it looked like it was made of swirling water or swirling energy, and it looked just like a miniature version of the Stargate, a movie that Kurt Russell was in, but there was no frame around it. And it expanded out to 6 feet across and 6 feet high, and it swirled there. And I thought I had become schizophrenic or something. I started looking around. Nobody in the cars around me were paying attention. I looked at the object, and I moved my head, and it stayed right where it was. I closed my eyes and opened them. It was still right where it was. And then it exploded, but not with any sound. It exploded outward, except all the drops of plasma, or whatever they were, disintegrated when they were about 3 foot from the ground. Then the light changed, and everybody went on their way. I had a friend who was really into UFOs and aliens and all that stuff, and told me about some of it from time to time, and I would tolerate it and listen to it, halfway anyway. And I called him and told him what had happened. He didn't have anything to say, which was unusual for him to not have anything to say. And that bothered me, because I was hoping he did have some kind of a thought on it. Well, the next week, on the same day, and close to the same time, the exact same thing happened. The swirling disc opened up the size of a plate, then it expanded to 6 feet. I checked to see if it was in my head or outside of my head, and it appeared to be outside of my head. Then it exploded. I went home. The next day, I told my friend Frank about what had happened. And actually, I was at his house. And I said, well, and he didn't say anything. And I said, well, what do you think it was? He said, I don't know, but I think you're an alien abductee. From everything you've told me of all the things that have happened to all of your life, and from this happening. And I told him he was crazy. But he turned around and he went on the internet and he wrote down 3 or 4 web pages, that addresses to him, and he folded it and handed it to me and said, you need to look at these. And that'll give you the answer. Well, I took the paper, folded it up, went home, and tossed it on the desk where my computer is, and went and watched TV. I just thought he was nuts. For 3 or 4 days, he hounded me to check on those web pages, and I told him I was too busy. I had other things I was doing, and he said, well, you really need to look at them, man. So on the 4th or 5th day, I went home, I got on the computer, and I started looking. And these web pages, all of them had like 50 to 90 questions that if you answered them yes, there was a great possibility that you were an alien abductee. And I got 90 to 95% of the questions yes. And I also ended up looking at a web page about PTSD, realized that I had PTSD and did have bouts with it from time to time. So that's how I discovered, I was pretty sure that I was an alien abductee.
So what was your next move, or what were you sort of planning then when you sort of thought, well, maybe I've been an abductee from aliens? What did you want to do after that?
Well, first I was just massively confused. And I also thought that I might be crazy because, in 2009, there wasn't much people saying that there were aliens coming here. On the internet there were, but I didn't go there very often. I had one event. I'm mixed up in my timeline. I'm just going to go ahead and jump to the big event.
Okay.
First off, I've got an electric line that runs through the woods on my property, and I stayed out there for 6 and 8 hours a day because I figured if these guys are taking me, there has to be some way for it to be reciprocal. They've been doing whatever for all of my life, and although they've saved my life, and that's pretty good, there should be more in it. I wanted communication with them. So I started talking to them, and part of the time I'd talk out loud because in my woods it's very private. Part of the time I'd think in my head, and I'd ask them, what's going on? Are y'all really taking me? Am I crazy? I've got to know if I'm crazy or not. I want to know what's going on. And I finally, after a day or two, I boiled it down to, I want to know what you're doing to me. So I just said that like it was a mantra over and over. And I was pretty manic about it. Or obsessed. Or 6 to 8 hours a day. At the end of that week, I was playing at a local restaurant for the first time since I was in high school, which I'd only played once there. I was going to play guitar and perform some country songs that I had learned. Actually, they were 60s songs as well, a few country, not me. And I got up on stage, I had all my equipment there. I got through the first song. Then the second song, the words started disappearing, and I made up more of the words to those songs than were the actual words. I couldn't leave because I had 2 huge speaker cabinets with me. I had my amplifier, my guitar, so I had to stick it out. And I could tell nobody could see how badly I was shaking inside. Then a man who could tell, who's now a friend of mine, he came out of the audience of about 15 people. And he took my guitar. He told me he was a guitar player. And he told me to get my words out of my case because he knew I wasn't singing the right words. So he played, and he had me look at him, and it was like we were in my living room playing. And I got more and more relaxed. The rest of the evening went pretty good. And the last song we played was Mr. Spaceman by Hey Mr. Spaceman by the Byrds. That was one of my favorite songs at that time. After it was over with, I got home, and midnight got here, and I was trying to go to sleep, and I couldn't, so I decided to meditate. And I use a CD that puts you in a meditative state. Well, got really, really relaxed. And then all of a sudden, I wasn't in my room. I was in this hammock thing, only instead of being hooked from end to end, it was hooked from side to side. And I started looking at the material, and it looked a lot like parchment or leather, but as I inspected it, I could tell it was not biological material. And there were 3 blankets in it, and they were rather worn. One of them was a child's blanket. Well, I crawled out of this hammock, and it was about 2.5, 3 foot. It was about 3 foot off the floor. I crawled off, landed on my feet, and everything looked sort of fuzzy. And I could not see the edges of the room. I could not see the ceiling or a light fixture, even though there was a dim glow of light, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It was like it was floating in the air or something. It was really strange. And at one point I did reach up and touch to straighten my glasses, and I wasn't wearing any glasses, which was just like when I went to bed. So that probably accounts for some of the fuzziness, but I do not believe I still wouldn't be able to see the corners or the walls or whatever they were. Well, I suddenly realized where I was. I realized I was on a spaceship, a UFO. I finally made it on, and I know where I am, and they just let me remember. And I heard footsteps coming because there was a door in that room, and it was open. I thought, man, I do not know if I'm ready to face aliens face to face. And I started trying to crawl back into the hammock, and then it was like a cut in a movie, like a fade to black really fast, and then back. Only I was laying on a table, a metal table, and there were 3 grays down near the foot of the table, and there was a 7-foot being to my left. He didn't look like a pirate. He looked like a giant praying mantis wearing a robe. And I'm going, in my mind, I'm going, wow. And he says, things are going on. Not much is happening yet. I'm beginning to feel a slight tinge of fear. And he says that he thinks at me, do not be afraid. And suddenly I was not afraid. And I also recognized his voice from something that happened in 1998 or 99. I had heard his voice before. Then somehow I split. I was in my bed, and I was aware of that, with my eyes closed, watching what looked like a holographic image floating in the air in front of me at the end of the bed. But I was in the room with him, too. And then the picture that I was looking at changed to black and white. And it zoomed in where it just had me in it, from my jaw down to halfway between my torso and my knees. And my feet were apparently drawn up and on the edge of the metal table, but I couldn't see them. And then it turned into X-ray. And I could see them administering the anal probe into my body. Then I was wide awake, and I was in my bed, just in a flash. And it wasn't like coming up from being asleep or even from being in a deep meditative trance. I was just completely wide awake instantly. And I turned over, and I went, wow, I've actually seen him, and they're letting me remember it. And then I went to sleep. And that's sort of unusual for me to just fall asleep instantly. It usually takes me an hour to an hour and a half to fall asleep. The next morning I woke up, and I was in this fantastic mood, and I went, wow, I saw them, I remember them, and then I thought, one of them's really weird looking, the tall one. So I drew a picture of him because he didn't look like anything I'd ever seen. All I knew about was the grays. Well, then I started crying, and I cried for an hour to an hour and a half, and there were no ideas causing me to cry. But it was like something was coming up out of me psychologically and leaving my mind. And I was in a fetal position part of the time. And I'm going, this is really weird. If this was a vision that they were showing me, that I'd be reacting like that. So that was later that day, I went into town and I saw Frank, and I told him what happened. And I showed him the picture of the tall, mantis-looking creature. And I said, this probably proves that it's all a fake, because I've never heard of this. I've never seen it. Well, he turns around and goes on the computer and he immediately pulls up the picture that he'd been looking at only a few days before, which was a drawing by a child of a praying mantis creature that looked exactly like the one I had drawn.
So how did you feel when that happened? Like, what were you thinking? This is the first time you remembered them after seeing them. You've told your friend. What was going through your mind?
Well, I knew I wasn't crazy. I was beginning to accept that I wasn't crazy. Then I started thinking, these guys come in my house anytime they want. There's nothing I can do that can stop them. And that caused me a lot of concern. But over a period of a couple of weeks, I started looking back over my life, and I noticed, especially when I'd heard that guy's voice, because he was letting me go into the light one evening. Only I changed my mind and didn't go. So I knew between 1999 and 2009 they had not hurt me. So it became a little easier with it, but I had to have somebody to talk to about it, because a friend warned me, you don't go around telling people you're abducted by aliens, because they will think you're crazy. He said, I know you're not crazy. You know you're not crazy now, but they will think you are. So I started looking on the internet, and I found a man in Houston named Daryl Sims. So I contacted the alien hunter, contacted him by email, and he sent me a questionnaire that I filled out. Tell me if I was definitely abducted by aliens. He wanted to meet me. He wanted to come to one of the Hoopon meetings and meet him in person. And he also put me into his support group, the Alien Hunter support group, where I would have people that I could talk to about it, and I would see that people were having similar experiences.
And did you find that the people that you talked to in the support group had much the same experience? Did they sort of identify the same sort of alien features that you had?
Yes. They had different experiences, but there was still the same really strange atmosphere about them. Some of them actually had seen the aliens more than I had, and some of them had seen them less. But it was when I first got on there, I just started playing in the background and didn't say anything for a couple of weeks. And my first question to them was, what do you do if you want to date somebody? You can't just tell somebody you're an alien abductee, but how would you pose this to someone? And the best answer that I got was to date somebody, date them for 3 or 4 weeks, a month or two, and then if things are going good, then you break the news to them.
Yeah.
And Gerald told me that the aliens can see X-rays, and he said they can also manipulate you where you are seeing through their eyes. So that began to make, because he was telling me, at that time I thought the experience in 2009, and it was 2009, I thought it was a vision. But the crying didn't add up. I later found that people often have emotional outbursts after being taken. And then he was telling me, no, it was the real thing. So that made a lot of sense, and I was able to get information from him that I wouldn't have gotten from any other source.
Now, with the mantis rather than the grays, did you have any other sort of different feelings about him? Like, was he someone you were scared of, or what was your impression?
Well, I couldn't be afraid of him because he just told me not to be. he seemed very intelligent. Like extremely intelligent, more than most people I know. He was he didn't really have emotions, happy ones or negative ones. Felt that he seemed to be in a good mood. He seemed to be free of an ego. Didn't have the problems that we humans have with self-doubt and all those kinds of things.
And so do you think he was more of a leader over the Greys?
Oh, yes. I'm sure he was telling them psychically what to do, or they were there even to protect him. Who knows?
So what do you think that they did to you? Like, what was their objective? So when they had you on the table and they were doing the probe, were they gathering information, do you think, or was there some other reason?
Well, at that time I didn't have the faintest idea. And now from an event that happened in March of last year, and from things I've read and things I've been told, I believe they were altering the DNA in my body, and they probably were getting information. I'd heard that they can actually access your spinal column from the probe and even your brain.
And so do you think there was a point to altering your DNA?
Yeah, so that my soul could inhabit this body. I've been taking my family since my great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father, and me. I'm the fourth generation to be abducted. And probably step by step, they were preparing each one of them for me to come along, hopefully. And as far as I know, because I was sent here from another planet, another dimension, really close to this one, maybe right where this one is, but in another dimension, and put into the fetus in my mother to grow up and help to gain more consciousness, to help raise the consciousness of the world, even if it's just a little bit, like all the star people. And also to write a book that I've written to help people who are abducted to learn to cope with it and it not to impact their lives negatively.
And so in your book, you were mentioning a relative that, or something that had, or just in your comments, a family member that was placed in a mental hospital. So what was that about?
Well, I don't remember the date right now, but the song, "Does Your Chewing Gum Lose Its Flavor on the Bedpost Overnight?" It became very popular. And I went to bed one night after I'd listened to it a few times, and it started playing in my head, and it would not stop. I could not go to sleep, and I was awake all night long. It was really a strange night, just this song playing over and over again. And the next morning I woke up. No, I didn't wake up. The next morning Mom came in the room, and I told her I had not slept, and I couldn't go to school. And I told her what had happened, and I asked her why that had happened. And she just said, "I don't know." And she took me and put me on the sofa and gave me a cola, said to watch TV all day and not to go to sleep. She wanted me to sleep the next day so I could go to school. Well, she went in the dining room and made a phone call. And I couldn't hear the conversation because of the TV. Stayed on the sofa all day, and at 5 o'clock my dad came home. And he acknowledged me, but he didn't really say anything. He got my mother, and they went in the dining room. And he came back into the living room alone. And he sat down on the edge of the sofa, and he looked me in the eye and said, "Son, if you don't straighten up, we're going to take you to a psychiatrist." And I'm going, wow. In my mind, I didn't say that out loud. I was very quiet. Going to a psychiatrist was a really bad thing in the 60s and in the 50s. People didn't even get divorced in the 50s and the 60s, and this was probably late 50s, very early 60s. So then he said that we Lacys do not talk about ourselves. And he gave me this speech several times during my lifetime when he was alive. We do not talk about ourselves. I don't even know what happened to my mother and father except while I was with them. We had a relative, a woman, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, who told people that little men, now at this point I should have remembered the little men from 1955, but I didn't. She said little men came into her room at night and talked to her. They ended up putting her in an insane asylum, which is what they were called in those days. And she died there. And you don't want that happening to you. So that was it for that conversation. But it left me where I knew I could never tell my parents anything that was going on in my head, or they were going to do something bad to me, like lock me up. So I felt like just smashed and totally alone at that point. And in a sense I was. My parents had a really easy time raising me because I never told them any of my problems, especially my emotional problems.
And so how is it now with your parents or family? Are your parents still with us, and what do they feel about the book?
They're dead.
Okay. And
now, I know this sounds strange, but I have talked to them once on my own after they passed, and in 2009, I went to the Dreamland Festival with Whitley Strieber, and there was a psychic there named Marla Freeze, who was the reference for the TV show Medium. And I mean, she's a medium, not a psychic. She's a psychic medium. I took a picture of my father with me because I know they work good with pictures, and I wanted to talk to her, and I was determined. So I sat right on the front row, and my natural inclination at that time was to sit on the back row. But I sat on the first row, and when she started when she got ready to do some random readings for people, my hand was the first one to go up, and I had the picture in my hand, and she picked me. So no, it wasn't the first one. There were 3 others before me. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Anyway, she picked me, and she held the picture against her leg, above her knee on the top, and she fell down. And she was trying to show me how my dad had died. He was trying to give me proof that it was him. And he had fallen and broken his hip. And they had to do a hip replacement surgery. My sister called me and told me about it and said that it's root. And I said, he's going to die. She said, no, it's a routine surgery. Nothing bad is going to happen. They do them all the time. Well, when he woke up, he refused to let them give him the anticoagulation shot because he thought he was in a prisoner of war camp. And about a week later, a blood clot in his leg let go, and he died. So anyway, Marla, I said, does Dad know about the aliens? And she said, he says, I know everything. And that one statement right there showed me that it was my father. So he told her that I was the 4th generation to be abducted. And then she said, I want you to tell the audience about your ancestors. And she kept apparently talking to him. And then when she finished, and I finished, she turned around and looked at the audience, and she didn't tell me goodbye for him like she had the other 3 people. She just started talking to the next one. And I went up to her in the lunchroom after we got through with the morning session, and I told her I wanted to thank her. And she said, well, I've got a message for you from your father, and he didn't want me to tell you in front of everybody because he felt that you would become upset. And I said, okay, because I thought, and she said, he says that you have the opinion that he's not proud of you, and he wants you to know that he's very proud of you. And I said, thank you, and I had to turn away because I started to cry. So she was right on the money about all that stuff, and you was too.
And so in writing the book, what were you hoping to do with that? Like, was there something that you wanted people to understand?
Well, I wanted to tell my story. I wanted to see everything that had happened laid out. And at first I wanted to publish the book, but then I started having such anxiety problems that I finally made a bargain with myself that I wouldn't worry about if the book was going to be published or not until right at the end. And then I would decide. But I wanted to get it written, and it was a cathartic experience for me seeing everything laid out like that. And I began to understand, like the canon, the mantis taking me to the light, that it was him, not an angel. I began to understand exactly what was going on and how it had been going on probably all of my life.
And so how are you now with this? Like, do you expect more visits? Where do you see it going now?
I get more visits. I'm hoping, like I put, now I'm very open with it. It's on my regular Facebook page. I show it to everybody. I talk to people about it. And I know in 2009 I would have gotten a totally different reaction from everybody, but now there's more of an openness and an acceptance of it. And they don't necessarily go, you're nuts. Although one person has done that, but it wasn't bad. So, and it didn't stop me.
Yeah.
I forgot your question.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you know, you got to keep moving forward. You can't. There's always going to be negative, especially when you're out in public, right? So,
right.
Can't worry about that. Well, it's certainly been interesting. I'm very interested in what you had to say, and thank you very much for sharing.
You're very welcome. It helps me to talk about it. I had to be quiet for several years, from 2009 to now.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. Again, the book is called Chosen, Chronicles of an Alien Abductee by Byron Lacy. Thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Thank you, Alan.
The mission has been completed.
The end! By George, he's got it! It is the end! I'll see you.
This has been a production of the Z-Talk Radio Network.
If you're lying to me, I'll be back.